We are live, Mitchell Sorensen here on Dynasty Theory. JB is out tonight on vacation, so you and I are holding down the fort. Mitch, what do you think tonight, man? How much can we rock the show tonight and fire John up before he returns?
Well, I mean, the real thing is he isn't on vacation. He's really still on suspension from last week to where, he said some things and we were like, you know what? Why don't you just go to a beach or something for a week? And he was like, okay, that's cool. But hey, there we go. We're already flipping each other around here. But no, dude, like, I can't tell you how excited I am for this week. Like, no one at my work really watches football. But I go up to all of them, like, just so you know, in one day, football's back. They're like, really? I'm like, well, kinda. It's the Hall of Fame game, but I'm not going to complain about it.
Yeah, things are definitely picking up and getting real here between the Hall of Fame game on top of the camp news. Each week of preseason that goes by, we get more starters playing, and it just gets more and more interesting. And I started out nice here saying John was on vacation, but I love as one of his main dynasty teammates how you could just throw him under the bus that quick. I give you props there, and hopefully John is listening, or we'll play it back and we could have some fun there. But let's dive right into some news. I think we had some really good news and the last week, especially, from player news to team news, and we'll break a little bit of it down tonight, how it impacts the fantasy football world and our dynasty listeners. The Miami Dolphins losing a 2023 first and a 2023 fourth for tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. Our question tonight that you put in the show notes, Mitch, is how does this help Tua, or does it help Tua? Kick us off. What's your thoughts there on the Miami outcome?
It was just before this happened, right? They had the 223 first. So if Tua was bad, they could go up and get a quarterback, or they could bring someone in free agency too and still have those two picks. Now, losing that pick, it really makes you wonder if they're more willing to stick with whatever Tua's limitations are. Maybe he just is awesome this year. They're going to stick with him anyways, because I know you've been really high on him. But I think it makes me just like him just a little bit more, because I think it creates one less avenue for them to get rid of him next year. Because if they only have the one first, if that one first isn't early, they're going to have to trade away their future in order to move up to get one of the big quarterbacks next year's draft. So then it leaves, maybe they trade for someone, but when the quarterback's being traded now, it's like multiple firsts that people want. And so in my mind, I think I kind of like Tua a little bit more. I still really worry about how good of a quarterback he's going to be on the field. But looking from the outside in right now, I think the Dolphins are going to have to buy into Tua a little bit more than what it looks like the Stephen Ross thought about him and his former coach thought about him. Looks like everyone's trying to replace him. But maybe McDaniel now isn't going to do that.
Do we know which first they lost?
I did not see which one it was.
So I'd be a little bit curious of that.
I would guess it's theirs because they traded for one, so I would assume they lost their own first.
So we'll have to do a little digging there and see whose pick they have, and that'll impact what they can gain. I like that. I think you're looking at it from the perspective, and we've talked about this on past episodes, of quarterback security. So you see a more secure position for Tua, and for that reason, it gained some value for you based on these news. I think I looked at it from a little bit different perspective, and I love looking at it from both ways as we go. And, I'm thinking this doesn't help Miami. That's for sure. You lose some prime draft capital there with the first pick, and then even a fourth is not something you want to kind of throw away. But my question is, what we don't know is how this plays out for Miami this season. What are their needs going to be after the year? Who do they lose in free agency? Is that a lost opportunity to land an offensive lineman in the draft for Tua, which we got to give these guys time in the pocket? Or we've talked numerous times about Miami. They always surprise us about getting a marquee running back. How does that running back situation materialize after this year? Or I even say even defense, Mitch, like we don't think about it sometimes, but maybe the defense just can't get off the field. So there's reps and volume that Miami doesn't get because their defense isn't good enough. So they can't even draft a defensive player. So losing a first round pick to me in no way necessarily helps Tua, but could they overcome it in free agency? Do they perform optimally enough this year where their needs are a little bit less? I kind of hope so, but was a little bit bummed there that one less asset Tua and Miami can gain.
That's a really good point with the defense that I didn't even consider. Like, they're going to go against the Patriots, who they're already hard to get off the field because they run the ball so much. They have to go against the Bills twice, and the Bills just won't leave the field against extremely good defenses. And then the Jets, they added a ton of offensive weapons, and if your defense is bad, then your offense isn't gonna hit the field, and that's what I care about for fantasy. Like, I love the game scripts to where it's like each team gets 60 plays a game, and they're just going back and forth. But I really don't like games to where the opposing team gets 40 and then you're hoping to get 25 out of the team that you're starting, right? So if that happens with Tua, I mean, it's really scary at that point.
Yeah. And you mentioned teams like New England that will grind it out and run the ball and pace. And if they're just grinding, eating clock, again, Tua doesn't get off field. Now, hey, maybe Miami has a great defense this year. There's, again, a lot that has to play out. But based on the early news, that's something I'll definitely be watching closely. And I know we're going to get into player shares tonight. We're going to have a little bit of dynasty and best ball comparisons and how it kind of correlates. And I definitely have a lot of Tua shares, Mitch. So I hope this news does not impact Miami too much. I definitely like your spin on job security there and definitely want to see Tua keep that. I am a believer. So that does increase the odds of him not being replaced next year. Unless there's anything, do you have anything else on Miami?
No, I think we can move on.
See, now if JB was here, we'd be talking about Miami until about the 30-minute mark of the show.
Yep.
But the other news we had was Tim Patrick tearing his ACL, and it is, man. I know it is 100% that time where all of us as dynasty owners are holding our breath, praying the guys on our rosters do not get injured. And that's a big impact in Denver. They paid him pretty good money this offseason to have a role in that offense. He was their number 3, so he's not, Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, but it's one less weapon. So what does that mean for Denver and their offense? I know you're wondering, is it more PT for Ken Hamler? What do you think?
Yeah, I have been off the Albert O train ever since that thing started. I was just off of it because there was a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. And how Tim Patrick plays, I think, he's a big body in that red zone. He's going to do really well there. Well, now they lost him. So now it's Sutton, I think, was always going to get his. Jeudy was always going to get his. But losing someone like Patrick is going to open up more opportunities for those tight ends, whoever the starting tight end is there. And I think it's probably going to end up being Albert O at this point. That maybe he's going to end up saving some people who took him a little bit higher in drafts than they should have, probably, before the NFL rookie draft happened. But now, I don't hate him as a tight end 1 this year, a low end tight end 1, but I can kind of get with it to where before this injury happened, I was, back end tight end 2, and at that point, I don't want any tight ends like that. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it was George Kittle, but if he's a back end tight end 2, I just don't want that type of player on my dynasty teams.
I like that you bring up the tight ends, and I do want to get into a little bit more of what we think of those tight ends, Albert O, Greg Dulcich, how what personnel they're going to put on the field. But I do want to bring up Ken Hamler a little bit more, and I see the posts in our Discord chat there, thinking it's Hamler's season at this point. I kind of saw him as still having maybe a limited role, but I do think he'll certainly be involved more. What I don't know about Denver is what they think of their other receivers. I looked at their depth chart here today, Mitch, and I think it fell under the classification that JB mentions as ocean bottom players. I think so too. I don't think any of them are on anyone's fantasy rosters, even maybe in our deepest dynasty leagues. And I don't even think I want to pick any of them up. They have Tyree Cleveland, Kendall Hinton, Montrell Washington, Travis Fulgham, Seth Williams, and Caden Davis. I mean, a few of those guys might have been on a roster at some point or another.
We've heard the name before, at least.
Right? We've heard a few of those names, but I don't know if they're necessarily in their plans. Do they sign a free agent at this point? They definitely would be a team that I would think would consider it more, unless they're like my Cowboys and just happy with these Noah Browns of the world. This sounds like a Dallas situation.
Cowboys, man.
I'm scratching my head there of why we're not signing the Will Fullers and T.Y. Hiltons of the world. Dallas is on that fast turf, especially. I think they would. But here in Denver, is it more, Hamler time there using that speed? A little bit of a rotation here, maybe with some of those other receivers, or do they go more 12 personnel now and know they have a receiving tight end in Dulcich? They've got great running backs in Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. you could definitely do a lot out of 12 personnel and still fire up Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. What do you think?
Yeah, I really think that, like, if John and I are doing the projections right now, we take Tim Patrick off of it. I don't think we'd be adding too much to Jerry or to Sutton. I think it would just, you'd end up having to bump up Hamler a little bit. And the problem is, I think he fits Russell Wilson's skill set very well, because, I mean, Wilson's going to want to throw it deep. He's not going to want to throw it over the middle, which it really isn't Hamler's game. And if that happens, then I think he turns more into a best ball play that, we'll talk about a little bit later, more so than ever trusting to start him on your dynasty teams. I mean, they could be playing like the Chargers at home, perfect field conditions, and I would still be like, man, Hamler can get you 2 catches for 18 yards, and that could be it that game. I just think that's really in his realistic range of outcomes, to where I kind of like Jeudy and I kind of like Sutton. So I'm happy having them on my teams. I don't think I'm going to go out and offer any more for him today because of what that injury happened a couple days ago.
Yeah, that's a great point there. It reminds me a little bit of when Russ was in Seattle and he'd have like a David Moore. And I think there's a couple other those guys like David Moore that occasionally would pop off for 2 for 68 and occasionally get a touchdown. And, a best ball performance, as you would say, or if you're desperate on a bye week with a flex and this guy has a shot like Hamler does, Hamler could easily go 2 for 100 and a touchdown and have some production there. But still look at Jeudy and Sutton as those main feature players, just like Metcalf and Lockett were. And there's part of me that thinks Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, Mitch, and maybe even Russ Wilson, like we haven't seen the old Russ Wilson in a while. And I'm just got this little gut feeling that with good coaching, we could all have a little bit of dynasty regrets of not being as aggressive as we could have to get the Jerry Judys and the Cortland Suttons. I'm not as high as Cortland Sutton as I think maybe what I'm reading in our Discord. A lot of people seem a little bit higher on Sutton. Yep. I'm a Jeudy guy. I have made some trades for Jeudy this offseason, but there's that little part of me that thinks Russ does cook, and 1 or 2 of those guys really do pop off.
Dude, and it happens. I mean, we know Russ can do that. And then it just goes back to, was it the injury that held him back? Was it Pete Carroll that held him back? Was it himself that held him back? I mean, we're going to find out really early, I think, in the season how well it plays out. And it's going to be one of those, you're right. You're going to be like, week 3, you'd be like, you know what? I should have a lot more Jerry Jeudy on my teams right now.
Yeah, and, even if Russ isn't cooking on the ground like he used to be with his legs, as we were over that 30 age mark in his career, he's still so athletic that I think even getting 20 to 30 yards rushing is better than those immobile quarterbacks that don't run at all. And if he gets a high volume of touchdowns and is effective in the red zone, and I mean, he could be a nice statistical performer. Where you mentioned liking Alberto. If we go back to those tight ends, like I still have Alberto probably around 30th in my rankings.
It's fair. I mean, it really is.
He's fluctuated a bit, and then Dulich comes in there, and Greg's one of those rookie tight ends, that a class that I wasn't high on, but when we were previewing tight ends on our show, I says he is one of my higher rated tight ends. So, one of those guys could be, what would you say, like sneaky, depending on the format of the league, making sure we're in tight end premium.
It would have to be tight end premium, yeah.
Bye week option, or unless you're starting 2 tight ends, they've got some sneaky on the bench value maybe where they could rise a little bit here.
Yeah, it's the tight end of the Chargers. His name's escaping me right now.
Gerald Everett.
Yeah, Gerald Everett. So, I mean, are either of the Denver tight ends going to be better than Gerald Everett this year?
I hope not.
I don't really think their positions, like, you can't think that they're in any better position. And Everett's a third of the cost of either of them. So that's what my issue is with guys like Alberto and Dulcich and anyone who just gets kind of propped up more so than we've actually seen it on the field. Like, I don't think Gerald Everett's a good tight end by any means, but I think he could easily end up outscoring Alberto. And then it's, what do you do with him at that point? You can't really, we know Gerald Everett doesn't have a market at all, even going to that good situation. What's going to happen if Alberto has that kind of season too?
Right. It'll be interesting to see if someone could pop off in Denver and surprise, and you get them at a value. You hurt my fantasy feelings a little bit there, Mitchell, with the Gerald Everett not being a good player. Even though I know you're probably right, but I do have a lot of shares in Dynasty and Best Ball, and again, we are going to get to that after our player news tonight. But when I look at, you don't get maybe say one of the top, I have about 9-10 tight ends that I really, love to get in Dynasty. Obviously, there's the elite ones. And then if you don't get the elite ones, you're hoping for the Goddards and the Knoxes and the Schultzes of the world. But even I'm okay even in a lot of our, whether it's a startup or, just fading even those guys and settling on the Gerald Everetts and the Hunter Henrys and, getting 2 or 3 of them and thinking, okay, hey, one of the 3 is going to
can
pop
make that
off.
work. Yep.
Play the matchups. We'll manage. David Njoku is another one that could have a really nice sneaky year. So there's some guys there at value I like that are in just great situations. And I got to believe Justin Herbert elevates Gerald Everett.
Yep. Yeah,
at least a little bit.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat from Mike. He's asking, do we think Denver brings in anyone like Jimmy Graham? The problem is I don't think there's any good tight ends out there. Like, I don't think bringing in Jimmy Graham helps or even hurts Alberto. Like, I don't think there's anyone out there that's going to affect anything. We saw, Chris Herndon got picked up today, right? And it's like, I'm not going to pick him up on my teams at all. He's nothing at this point.
I think you really got to see how these teams utilize these players. Like, if Denver was a team to pick up a Jimmy Graham, I would be a little bummed, Mitch. Now, I don't know how much thread is left on the tires of Jimmy Graham. I mean, he's approaching ancient here in the tight end world, him and Jared Cook that are out there. But if a team does sign them, odds are they're going to pay him a few bucks and use them in some capacity. And if you watch Jimmy Graham on film last year, when he got to the red zone, Fields was throwing to him left and right. And he was actually, to some degree, effective Jimmy Graham. I'm watching him catch some jump balls or back shoulder catches. Like, there's still some ability. And the last thing you want is him getting any targets in the red zone when you have Alberto or Greg Dulcich. So I definitely would be worried if you have one of these Denver tight ends, because you can't afford to give up any playing time as it is. Like, we're hoping just to get enough production from them in the ideal situation. So let's hope Jimmy Graham does not steal them if you have shares of Alberto or Greg Dulcich.
I know that's just the hope right now, is like, you hope that an injury doesn't ruin like the one hyped player that you have coming in.
Right. And then what I saw, Farrell Brown was claimed the starting tight end in Houston this week. And I saw him going a little bit more on our waiver wires, just on the subject of tight ends here really quick. And I believe he's going to be the blocking tight end. Like, how could Brevin Jordan not be the receiving tight end? So I always want to warn our listeners too, just because you see someone's a starting tight end, don't overspend and think because he's the starter, he's going to be a fantasy sleeper, because he may just be starting so they could protect the quarterback and get that run game going. And, he could capable enough to catch a dump off or a play action and do some things in the pass game. But when it's third down or often in the red zone, and we did see Brevin Jordan last year in the red zone, especially late in the year, have a little bit of a role there where he looked athletic. We're like, oh, wait a second, Brevin Jordan's alive again.
Brevin Jordan, man. I love him this year.
I can see him having a role there and being their pass-catching guy. And even if he's not on the field as much as we like, as long as he's in on those passing fantasy football situations,
that's all we care about.
We're going to be happy in our world there. So let's turn it over now to the Cleveland Browns. A very interesting topic here. I know it's like a tough one to talk about here on a lot of levels. Deshaun Watson gets suspended for 6 games, and now we're hearing about the NFL appeal. So I think one of the questions we're going to talk about here, Mitch, is the impact of how long that suspension is. But what does it mean for Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, David Njoku, DPJ there, who's got some upside? What does it mean for him the first half of the season? What does it mean for him the second half of the season? Maybe long-term prognosis? What are your thoughts?
So I think without a shadow of a doubt now, he's going to be gone for 12 games. I think that's the bare minimum from everything you're reading from all the NFL insiders. It's a minimum of 12 games. So that puts him out at least through the Houston game, because they said that Goodell really doesn't want him playing at Texas in that stadium. So it'll be at least that long.
And we know that's a big deal and a big difference in Dynasty or any league, really, especially if you want to compete this year, whether it's 6 or 12 games.
Exactly. And so after that, they're on the road in Cincinnati. They have the Ravens at home. Then they play the Saints. Then they're at Washington. And then they're at the Steelers. I don't know if I trust him after not playing for 2 years to do anything in those games. I mean, even best case scenario, he's back week 13. And so that makes me go back, like, well, I can't trust Watson. So he's not probably going to be on most of my teams this year. And then you have Chubb, who I think is still going to be fine. I mean, we saw what Penny did. Penny was horrible with, Penny was very good with a horrible Geno Smith at quarterback, is what I was trying to say there. So I think Chubb could be just as good. But I'm sorry, Dan, Amari, I am worried. And I know Geno did well in games. He was more than okay with Metcalf and with Lockett. I'm really worried about him in that Cleveland weather. And so it turns into, I don't like anyone else on that team outside of Chubb this year. And I don't think my feelings on that are going to change now for the next 14 weeks. I think Chubb's going to be the guy that I'm willing to have in best ball, in DFS, on my dynasty teams. All the rest of them, I feel like there's a chance they could end up losing a fair bit of value before next season.
Yeah, and I think it's a double-edged sword. How if you're in this situation and you're trying to manage your quarterback position here with the Cleveland Browns quarterbacks, maybe you have them both.
Mm-hmm.
And then you bring up the point, we worry about Deshaun Watson not having played football in a year, and if he is suspended at 12 games, a higher amount, how much time does that give him? Because he's not even allowed in the headquarters for that entire time. So anything he's doing is on his own, and that's not the same as NFL speed with a new offense. So it's when he comes back, if you're even in contention still,
right,
how effective is he?
Going to play him in the fantasy playoffs.
Right? And now so you don't know what you're going to get. Then I do like handcuffing my quarterback, especially in deeper dynasty leagues, because if my guy's out 1 or 2 weeks, hey, it's nice to have that backup as a filler so you don't have to scramble and trade for a quarterback. You can still start the backup in your super flex, especially if the matchup is nice and the backup's good enough where he's not going to, go in there and throw 3 picks and hurt you. Jacoby Brissett's a good football player, but to how we talked about some situations in Denver, there's a big difference between a good football player and a good fantasy football player. So what happens with the situation with Jacoby Brissett? I heard recently my boy and former favored football coach Bill Parcells say, hey, I like Jacoby Brissett. I know he's mentioned Belichick thought he was a backup. Parcells thought he is more than a backup, but Parcells was the kind of guy that could do that as he did in Dallas with a Quincy Carter and then eventually bringing up Romo. And so certain coaches and coaching staffs could get a little bit more out of him, but in the same breath, Coach Parcells wasn't playing fantasy football. Yep. He was winning games and not turning the ball over and winning with defense and run game. And that's what Cleveland's going to do. They're going to win with defense and run game, which probably goes to your point of Chubb probably being safe here in the grand scheme of things. But I don't think Jacoby Brissett, similar to Geno Smith, can support more than one offensive weapon.
That's my worry.
Yep. Like we're asking about Cooper, the tight end position, and DPJ as a sleeper. That's not going to happen with Jacoby Brissett. Maybe one of those guys still pop off and have enough production to be relevant.
Yeah, there were times to where I played Jacoby in DFS when he was with the Colts. Like he was an extremely cheap play, and you're like, look, if I get 2 touchdowns, that's going to be great. And that's kind of like what you were hoping for in Seattle last year. And I think that's probably the tops you're going to be able to get with the Browns this upcoming season. And then what if it's Donovan Peoples-Jones who ends up getting that touchdown and it's not the person that you got? Even, it's going into that weekly and having to hit that start button on one of these Browns wide receivers is just something that I'm not wanting to do. And luckily for me, because I don't have a lot of those players, so I don't have to make a lot of those decisions. But that's also the reason why I don't have a lot of these players, is just in case this happened. Now I don't have to worry about it. But I have a lot of Chubb, and I have a little bit of Hunt too. But do I have a lot of Chubb on my dynasty teams, because you can't move him. If he's on your team, you're stuck with him.
Yeah, I'm sorry to we're going to again talk about guys that slide in best ball shares later, and even in dynasty, we talk about not being able to move them, but I'm wondering, is he the underrated guy of all the running backs? Saquon Barkley continues to be a shiny toy. Alvin Kamara, despite being, having some legal challenges that could be on the horizon, still a shiny toy. Derrick Henry, even though his legs may fall off, is still, holding some value, but Chubb just gets behind all of these guys. And is that a guy similar to the Denver receiver situation? Hey, are we not talking enough about Nick Chubb? Because the guy, we're watching him squat more weight than
Right.
you could possibly imagine. I mean, he's in incredible shape. So and they have an incredible offensive line too. I talked about doing my offensive line study, and Cleveland's probably one of the elite old lines in the league, which I was trying to look at that quarterback situation, glass half full going into the show and thinking, well, you know what? Maybe if the coaching uses Brissett right, and you got to respect the run game. They might try to put 8 in the box, which frees things open for Brissett. But I mean, Baker couldn't even support a lot of, he had the same O-line and run game. And I just don't think we haven't seen it from Jacoby Brissett to think that there's anything more.
And I still want to believe in that coaching staff. I'm not sure if Stefanski's a good head coach. Like, that's the problem that we kind of run into, right? Like, we thought it was very good his first season. It's fallen off since then. Maybe it was a Baker issue. Maybe it's a coaching issue. And I think it's so close in the NFL now to where there's talent on every single team. Sometimes that coaching isn't there. Like, Dan, then what do you have? You can have all the talent in the world, but if you can't put the players in the right position, then it doesn't even matter how good they are.
Yeah, and we saw that unravel in Cleveland, an organization that I have forever claimed to be full of dysfunction. Yep. For a little while, gave a glimmer of hope of moving, down the dysfunction rankings, and then all of a sudden it unraveled with OBJ not getting the ball and wanting out of there, and the team having some struggles, and then the Baker saga. So now it's okay. This team invested $200 million in Deshaun Watson, which. Okay, hey, a good Houston Deshaun Watson, we get it. But with all the legal trouble and everything surrounding him, now you're wondering, okay, is Cleveland just throwing money? How is this going to pan out? Could Stefanski lose that locker room and things unravel before Watson ever gets to get started? And before you know it, it'll probably be a new coaching staff leading to Deshaun Watson next year.
I think that could easily happen, to be honest with you.
So we see some narratives there, Mitch, that there is definitely a lot of risk in Cleveland Brown players. I think they have a role in our fantasy rosters, but not maybe necessarily the high hopes we had in the perfect scenario when everything's going right. And JC is right there in the chat. Cleveland is a case study in dysfunction, without a doubt.
Which leads perfectly into the next team, though. Because, I mean, if Cleveland is 1A, I think Arizona might be 1B as far as it goes with dysfunction.
Yeah, I mean, there's another one that, again, they put all the money into quarterback and then put this little clause in there about him not studying, which, it could possibly not go anywhere good in the media and in the locker room. I mean, because the first sign of anything bad, the guys are scratching their head looking at Kyler and thinking, hey, is he really putting in the work? What is that? That kind of plants a seed in their heads. And then you've got a guy like Marquise Hollywood Brown, who after the DeAndre Hopkins 6-game suspension for putting some sort of substance in his body. Okay, hey, we'll bring in Hollywood Brown, and he decides to drive 120 miles per hour, whatever he is in there in Arizona, which is a misdemeanor in the state of Arizona if you're 20 miles per hour over the limit. I learned something new. That was very interesting. If I know that's a misdemeanor, there's no way I am going to be driving too fast there. Even NFL players, again, I never understand, why do you need to go that fast? Well, what am I missing here? Get someone to drive for you. You have everything in the palm of your hands. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing kind of popping up there with Arizona. This is an organization that, despite having 11 wins a season ago, when it counts the most, they have faltered.
Yep.
They might
every time.
I don't want to pick on your Lions. They might look good sometimes when Detroit wasn't at their best, but when they play those good teams, they struggle.
Yep.
And that's, going to put their head coach on the hot seat when things don't go right.
Yeah, it's with Hollywood Brown. I don't even know if he gets suspended, but it's just kind of like one more thing with the Cardinals to where I'm just like, I talked about it last week. I'm okay moving Kyler. But a person that I really, really like, man, I love Zach Ertz this year. Like, I think he is just extremely safe. He is like the one tight end that's probably valued in that Albert O tier, to where I'm willing to play him every week and just not worry about it. I would love to trust Rondale Moore. Rondell Moore, I think, could have a great shot of getting 8 targets a game, easy 60 yards. Who knows if he's ever going to get a touchdown? But I think Zach Ertz is the guy that you can lock in for targets in that offense until DeAndre Hopkins comes back.
He's
And
another.
with, like, I was just going to say, with the stuff that like Hollywood Brown is doing, like, I was never in on him. An amazing thing in our Discord. I love our Discord. There's many times to where I'm seeing people vote Hollywood over a future first round pick. And there is just no league that I'm in that I won't accept that pick. You offer me a first round pick for any Hollywood share, he is gone. I don't care if you have the greatest team in history of man, and it's guaranteed to be the 1.12. He's off my team. He's gone.
We are exactly the same. And I think if you went in the Discord and you look at some of those trade polls that are in there that Hollywood was involved, more likely than not, I voted for the other side, unless it was just not a fair trade or whatever the case may be. But first round pick, I don't care what kind of first round it is. And normally we see that often. We're asking whoever posts those polls and do you think it's a high first, a low first? That really impacts a lot of trades. But I will take any of the top 12 college players next year over Hollywood Brown. And Mitch, Zach Ertz is someone I probably should be listening to you more, and maybe a lot of our members of the Discord, because I have seen a lot of Ertz love, and I'm looking at a lot of rankings, and he's another guy that I kind of see falling off of the that age train, but he still finds ways to get open. Then they draft Trey McBride, and I get a little turned off by having 2 really good tight ends in an offense. And again, I struggle with that Arizona offense, other than James Conner. I love James Conner as long as he can stay healthy, but I do struggle a little bit. But I see your point of it being safe and potentially having a lot of volume this year and a security blanket for Kyler, as long as we don't see Trey McBride sneaking into that a little bit too much in some format. But Kingsbury's got his hands full again. And now I said he was on the hot seat potentially if things don't go right, but they just gave him an extension. So again, I think Arizona views this as we had 11 wins last year. And I think us in the fantasy community are like, wait a second, they fizzle out every year at the end there. And we haven't seen signs to that it's going to get better. And James Conner's not getting any younger. Nuke Hopkins isn't getting any younger. AJ Green, Zach Ertz, none of these guys are getting any younger. So it's going to be really interesting to see the direction of this organization. And then Hollywood goes and gets arrested.
I love that you brought that up, because that's like one of the biggest reasons to where it's like, I don't know about Kyler, because we know things change in the NFL quickly. How have the Cardinals built their team? Like, who do you trust? Like, on defense, you have JJ Watt. That's awesome. On offense, you have DeAndre Hopkins. They're both over 30. And then you have, like, you kind of hope Rondell Moore's a thing, or you have Zach Ertz, who's probably a year away from, turning into Jason Witten. So it's just one of those things to where I don't even know who's going to be good on their team next year. And if Hollywood Brown's their number 1 wide receiver, I'm going to be really worried. We saw how that happened, how well that worked with Lamar last year when the Ravens threw the ball a ton. He was great for fantasy. I mean, he was really good for fantasy, but his team was willing to move on with him as soon as that season ended. They're like, okay, we'll trade you. And they haven't said one word about him since.
Yeah. And then, you get yourself in trouble with the law there. That makes me question your dedication, your focus. Is this a guy you build around? And, you have all that money invested in Kyler now. Where do you turn? At what point do you cut ties with Nuke Hopkins?
Right.
And, if you got to replace James Conner, and they still do have a competitive roster, so they're not going to be terrible this year. So you don't have a high first coming anytime soon. So at some point, I think there's going to be some interesting questions and decisions in Arizona there, Mitch.
Yeah, I think so too.
So some good teams that we have to discuss based on the latest news, but I want to segue. And just a quick little interruption. Did you have that Calvin Johnson jersey? Is that newer?
So I've had it for a long time, but that frame actually broke. So I went and got a new frame, and now it's finally back up. That's the one that, like, I forgot how much I paid for that jersey. Then I looked it up the other day. I'm like, oh yeah, I way overpaid for that jersey, but not many people have a Calvin Johnson jersey, so I'm kind of happy with it.
There's no price on team loyalty, and he was a legend. He was awesome. So if you're watching on YouTube or you play this back, you'll know what I'm talking about there behind Mitchell Sorensen there. He's got some sweet jerseys there. Mitch, best ball, dynasty, roster shares. We said John was out tonight, so whenever John's out, the kids play and we get to talk best ball and DFS, but always tie it to Dynasty for our listeners. We are both high on, I'll kick it off with Devin Duvernay. I'm looking at our Dynasty shares, our best ball shares. He is a guy that we both have a lot of roster ownership of. Why is that?
Because he's free. He's free in leagues. We both like Lamar, and he's just a guy to where, especially in best ball, he's going to get some games to where he gets a couple touchdowns. He might get 60 yards, and you could get him with the last pick in the draft, maybe like this round before the last round of the draft, to where, like with best ball, you just don't have to worry about starting him. Unlike in Dynasty, to where I don't have a whole bunch of him in Dynasty because I just don't know when I'm going to start him, right? Like I know I'll start Bateman every week. I know I'll start Andrews every week, Dobbins every week. Will I start Duvernay? Probably if one of them are injured, but other than that, probably not. But as far as like best ball goes, I really, really like him there. And something I just want to bring up why we're talking about this again is, so looking at your best ball percentages, if you play with them, and then you have your Dynasty, what you're looking to mingle in those, look at your best ball after you do 5 or 6 of them and see who are you really high on that's young. Because if you're high on them and they're young and they're lower valued, you're expecting them to do a little bit better in redraft this year or in best ball, however you want to consider it. They do better, their Dynasty values going up, and they're helping your best ball teams. And then you can look at your veterans and be like, I have a lot of veterans. Like we're going to talk about one later that I absolutely love. And I'm fully confident that he's going to hold his Dynasty value and he's going to help me this year in best ball as well. And so you're just looking for, there's a lot of guys that I have a lot of high Dynasty shares on. I don't have them all in best ball, which tells me I shouldn't trust them as much as I think I should trust them, unless it's someone like we were talking about it before the show, DeAndre Swift. Love DeAndre Swift. Loved him in the 3rd round of best ball drafts. I don't love him at the very beginning of the 2nd round, so I don't have him on any teams right now. But besides that, I think it's just really cool to look at your exposures in the different leagues and see maybe you should be off a player in Dynasty because you don't like him this year in best ball.
So there's a lot of takeaways that could be unraveled there. And for our listeners that maybe don't play best ball or, are kind of wondering what we're talking about or why we're talking about it, there's a lot of value in playing. I think early, again, we're year-round Dynasty. Again, it gives you practice drafting. It gives you an opportunity to see different values of where players are going. Yes, there is a difference between ADPs and Dynasty and best ball, but you get a little bit of a feel for the market and where the fantasy community is on as far as players. And I think we also took away from that, Mitch, that we like free things. If it's free, it's for you and me. And Devin Duvernay did fit in that class there. I have 59% shares in best ball, and he is a younger player. We say, hey, does it translate to Dynasty? I do have 78% of him in Dynasty. Again, a lot of that is because it's free.
Yeah.
A lot of that's because he's young. I think a potential of a number 2 wide receiver situation in Baltimore. I like stacking players, especially in best ball. It's part of the strategy. And again, when we talk about best ball, it's you draft the roster and you just let it ride. So there's no management. So our focus is on managing our Dynasty rosters, but we get that draft practice in there. We let it ride. And Devin Duvernay, if you have Lamar Jackson, you're kind of holding out some hope there. So hopefully that pans out. We will see for both of us here. And I think I kind of look at those Dynasty shares, what maintains value. Again, we're drafting best balls almost after the NFL season ends, and then we keep going. You could do this on Underdog. You could do this in DraftKings. There's a couple different formats where you could draft on. But again, players' values change over time. Focusing specifically on running backs. Okay, Mitch, you said Miles Sanders, you have over 50% of best ball shares, your 3rd highest owned running back. That matters. Okay, we've got a lot of running back shares. Talk a little bit about that.
So I was actually kind of shocked when I pulled up his stats earlier today when we were going to talk about him, that like he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season yet. To me, I'm like, that's kind of crazy, but he has had the injury bugs. They do like to shuffle running backs there. But that offense intrigues me so much. Jalen Hurts, he's coming on, and I think he's turning into a really good quarterback too, where 2 years ago I was like, I don't want any Jalen Hurts. I don't, they're going to replace him immediately. I don't think they are. I think he's going to be their quarterback for a while. I think that offense is going to continue to get better, especially with A.J. Brown. We're talking about with the Dolphins, we're kind of worried about their defense and what's going to happen there. The Eagles have a very good, well-built team to where their defense is going to get the ball back for the offense. The offensive line should be there, should be able to help the offense move. And the more the offense is on the field, the more I like Miles Sanders. I know that there was the little training camp blurb that came out like, oh, he's running with the threes. And immediately the head coach comes out and he's like, yeah, that's not really a thing. He's going to be with the first string tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And he comes out the next day and has like a long touchdown run or something. So he's just a back to where he's like, we talk about free as far as Devin Duvernay. As far as starting running backs in the NFL, Miles Sanders is free. Like he goes behind all of the big names that you're thinking of. And I think he has just as good of a chance to have a great year that like A.J. Dillon has, right? People love A.J. Dillon. They'll give a back and first for him in a lot of leagues. I think Miles Sanders probably outscores him this year. And granted, Miles Sanders has, one more year in the league than A.J. Dillon does, but I just think he's one of those players to where his value is so low right now, but his ceiling is high enough that I'm willing to have a lot of them in best ball to hopefully help me win $2 million. Sorry, Dan, you could get the other million, and then help me win some dynasty leagues as well.
And I think we're almost giving our listeners some like trade targets here tonight as well. And you're identifying, hey, I'm high on this guy in best ball for all these reasons. And we've talked in past episodes of Dynasty Theory is, the Eagles is a team with a lot of fantasy upside based on how good that O-line is. And then they bring in A.J. Brown. Hurts has all these weapons. He's got another year under his belt. All the signs are pointing up there in Philadelphia. And then we're saying, hey, if we have all these shares in best ball because we see this potential upside and we're getting them at a value, that can translate to dynasty. And a guy like Miles Sanders, even though he hasn't had that big 1,000-yard season, we know injuries have been a factor. He is obtainable in dynasty more than, hey, you're going to have a real hard time getting, the Austin Ecklers and the Najee Harrises and Jonathan Taylors. No one wants to give them up. But you could get yourself Miles Sanders, and he's young, and he has upside to break out this year. And if that comes to fruition, because we're banking on 1 year, a big year in best ball, he has a big year in dynasty, his value goes up next year. And he's a free agent, so he's going to, get some money, more likely than not. You definitely have a guy of value. And I think some people I had in that class with Miles Sanders, you look at, you have a Miles Sanders thought before I shift gears there. Do you want?
No, you're good. Go ahead. I like the guys that you have listed here.
Yeah, similar to Miles, and I'm with you on Miles. I have 27% shares in my best ball leagues.
Yep.
I probably would have more, but I hate the Eagles, and it would translate more to dynasty. But as a Cowboys fan, I've got some limitations.
Understandable.
But I definitely see the value, and I am getting him here and there. I like those New England Patriot running backs, even though I do think Mac Jones takes a step this year in that passing game. I think it's still a primarily run first team that gets a lot of volume. And I love Damian Harris and I love Ramondre Stevenson. I think early in the best ball season, I've historically in Dynasty been a Damian Harris guy, and I says, hey, watch this guy, and he's done well. He's had volume. He's gotten red zone targets. So I have 36% or 41% shares in best ball of Harris, 36% in Dynasty. Again, he's at a good age. He's a free agent. He can land as a starter next year. Stevenson, I have 27% in best ball and 22% in Dynasty. Not as high. Part of that is because he's a little bit, second year. He's other people have been on him too, so it's a little harder to get those shares. And he's been picking up a little bit more with some offseason camp news where he's been a little bit harder to get lately than a Damian Harris. So the shares aren't as high, but still higher than most of my running back shares. And I think, again, high on the upside season for best ball. I think there's going to be a lot of volume where I think that offense could support both of them, with some of them, different weeks. So maybe one guy might go off a little bit more, but then that translate into dynasty. And then I just add, not a guy I'm necessarily high on. I think he's a feature back by any means.
I was wondering about this one.
Yeah, this one is a little bit more of a handcuff theory here, where I know Breece Hall came to New York and is the guy, and I get that. I dig that. I support that. I'm on the Breece Hall train there as long as the Jets can continue to grow. But I put Michael Carter. One, he's a guy I had a lot of shares of, and then we know, when Breece Hall got drafted in our Dynasty episode special there, you saw me get deflated. But I think the Jets are going to, don't want to put too much pressure on Zach Wilson, even though they got some talented receivers and they are going to sling it from time to time. I think they want to control the ball, control the offense. We see in the NFL, similar to New England, I think this is an offense that could sustain 2 running back production to a degree. And if Breece Hall ever went down, I think Michael Carter is one of the more talented number 2 running backs in the NFL, where he would have great value on those weeks that Breece Hall is out if he's injured or whatever the case may be. So, and he's almost free again, Mitch. He is a guy that in so many of these best ball drafts, when I'm getting to running back 3 and 4, I often get Michael Carter and feel good, especially when he's like running back 4 and sometimes even running back 5 on my rosters.
Yeah, I'd have to assume we've talked about timing a lot with when we draft teams, when we trade for players in Dynasty. And Michael Carter was one to where if you drafted a team pre-NFL draft, you probably spend a lot higher draft capital than what you have to do now on Michael Carter. And the same thing, you bring up Stevenson. Like, I love Stevenson now. I didn't love him 3 months ago, but now I am one of the people that's buying into the training camp hype. Buying into maybe James White isn't going to play for a long time. Maybe Stevenson is that back. And we've always loved that back for the Patriots, no matter who it's been. So I've been a little bit slow, but I know you've been on Stevenson for a while. So I got to give you props on that because he was someone who I should have brought in on. I'm like, no, Damian Harris. But now I really don't want Damian Harris on too many of my Dynasty rosters. Best ball, completely fine. But as far as Dynasty goes, he's someone that I'd be more than willing to ship off for a mid-second on, I'd say, like 90% of my teams.
I like your theory. I don't know if I would give Harris up for a mid-second because I think he has a strong role in New England. Running backs are just hard to get, Mitch. It's the value of the position a little bit. But I definitely see your point. And Stevenson was a guy that I liked his college film and liked him. And then when he really flashed last year, I'm thinking, boy, this guy might even be better than I thought.
Yep.
And I was happy to have those shares and obtain a few more. But a guy you have not been slow on, Mitch, is James Cook. All right. You have somehow, and I think this is kind of funny because you and I had some James Cook, Zamir White debates back in the day there. But you have over 50% James Cook shares in best ball and keep getting more shares in Dynasty. Why is that?
Dude, so during the rookie drafts, I had a hard time drafting him at the end of the first round. Like, I was still kind of a Singletary guy. I think he's going to be on the field, but the upside that Cook gives you in best ball is just so high. If anything happens to Singletary, a James Cook turns into, I don't think he's going to be like a top 5 running back, but where getting him in drafts, that turns into a league winning kind of running back to where he doesn't need to be a top 10 running back. But with what you're getting him for in best ball, and he ends up being just a top end RB2 weekly, then all of a sudden you start printing that money. And that's really what I was looking for here. And I've recently switched from my fantasy league in a lot of startups to where I'm pretty much only doing startups on Sleeper now. For whatever reason, the ADP is a little bit different. And I'm getting James Cook in like every single league after all of the big running backs go. And he's just sitting there. I'm like, why wouldn't I pick him there? And so I keep drafting him over and over. So my roster percentage just goes up and up and up. And I don't think it's so much that I'm buying into his talent as a player, but the running back for Buffalo with Josh Allen. I know Josh Allen is going to steal most of the touchdowns, right? That's just the kind of player he is. But James Cook in that offense could end up, having a 10 touchdown season. If that's going to happen, then I'm more than happy with whatever his value is in Dynasty now and whatever his value is in best ball, because I think he could actually lead you to money.
Yeah, and a lot of those touchdowns are probably going to be of the 20-plus yard variety,
right?
As he is a very explosive back, and he just feels like, and I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan, so I've seen what he can do. I kind of know the style of back he is, and then we know as a Dynasty community what Buffalo is trying to do and trying to put in that offense as this pass catching back and one of the most explosive offenses in football. He is definitely in an ideal situation, and there is value. You talk about the difference of ADPs in a sleeper versus my fantasy league. And it's the same thing in best ball. We often draft an underdog and we see where he is a good value in underdog. And in underdog, we often draft this $25 tournament, which has this incredible prize money. or you could draft of the $5, $3. They have different type leagues. But if you go over to DraftKings and do a best ball, Mitch, the value of some of the guys in DraftKings, it's like less competitive. There's not as many sharks
I think so.
in the waters. You could really get some great value. And James Cook could definitely win a best ball or a dynasty league this year. For me, Mitch, I thought that was pretty impressive that you got 50% of anybody in best ball, especially at the running back position, which is,
just keep hitting it.
That's going to be fun to watch on your rosters. I had 59% Devin Duvernay, we mentioned. I had 55% Devontae Parker. Parker's been my guy that has had value early in the offseason and in best ball because I just thought he had number one receiver potential, and I thought he was better than the other New England receivers. And then now as we're in camp and we're getting closer, I keep reading these New England reports that they think he's the number one receiver that they've been looking for and is going to be the one guy not to substitute as much as the others. So as long as he stays healthy, he's going so late that there's nothing to lose with Devontae Parker. And I think he's even an attainable guy in Dynasty where he could help you win this year. I know, receiver cliff is going to be soon for Parker. Maybe you trade him while his value is even the highest right now. I could see some merit in that if you could land something really good for Parker, even on the other side. And I have Joe Burrow 40%, which just tells me I love Cincinnati Bengals stacks all offseason.
Exactly.
I'm projecting something there. The dynasty upside is there too, as he's kind of now entering, even though a small sample size, that elite tier of dynasty quarterbacks. I was a little sad to see I don't have the near the like Joe Burrow what I would like in dynasty. So I'm a little sad there, but he's just so hard to get. I can't believe John's not even here.
I know we're going for an hour. I didn't think that would happen.
Me neither. I didn't think there was a chance here. So I'm going to keep us going. I'm going to keep us on time tonight. But let's just touch on one player really quick, God. Mitch, that you have so much rostership that you don't even know how you have it. Who do you have there?
Well, I mean, I really don't want to get in depth on this player because it just makes me sad to know that I have him on over percent of my best ball rosters. I have him on over 25% of my dynasty teams, and it's Kenny Golladay. And I can't even say it's because I'm a Lions fan, because I picked up most of them last year when he went to the Giants. So I don't even know how this happened, to be honest with you. We, came up with this concept for the show, and I'm started going through my notes, and I'm like, oh no. Like, he's probably like the third wide receiver that I want on the Giants. And like somehow I'm even still drafting him in best ball. I'm like, I don't know how this is happening, but I'm guessing it's because he's getting so low right now that he could end up being the number one. But the problem is Kadarius Toney's so good, dude. You were on him to begin with. Kadarius Toney's on the field. He's the number one. Wandell is probably the number two, and Kenny Golladay is best case scenario ends up being the possession wide receiver that they kind of throw to when they need to get a catch. But even then, I don't think that's Kenny Galladay's game.
Yep. I think we're hoping for your sake, Mitch, that in best ball, at least, Golladay could pop off and have a few games. And in best ball, where you don't have to set a starting lineup, hey, if he gives you a few good weeks that help you up in the standings and towards a good season, there's still value. It's one that we would hope, we know he was once very highly sought after. The Giants paid a lot of money for him. We've talked about Danny Dimes and some New York Giant upside, but we definitely are worrying because all we're seeing is Kadarius Toney and a lot of Wandell Robinson in this camp. And how much offense are we going to get out of the Giants, and could they get anything out of that investment? So that's a very fragile one there for you.
So fragile. That's the best way to put it.
We will see how that kind of plays out on both ends. And for me, it's Laviska Shenault, maybe a little bit younger. So maybe I have a little bit more of a pipe dream that he could do something in Jacksonville with, my 45% best ball shares and 21% dynasty shares. But everything I'm reading in Jacksonville is he's like wide receiver 4 that they're trying to utilize in the punt game, which isn't going to get me any fantasy points. Zay Jones reports are looking better. And that's really concerns me if Zay Jones is getting more hype than, Laviska Shenault, and then you have Christian Kirk, who we've talked a lot about, and even Marvin Jones might have another good year in him or so. So I'm a little bit nervous about my Visca shares. I probably should be more worried about my 100% Tommy Tremble in Dynasty and 22% in best ball, as I often take him with the very last pick, depending on my roster construction. We will see where that goes. But one talking point to wrap up our show here, and then I'll touch a little bit on our boy John Bowers, just some of his projections, just to keep him involved in the spirit of John's roster shares. You talk about the best way to use this as being higher on young players in both best ball and dynasty, since it would mean good numbers this year and a valued. Do you have guys that you trust, or what's your thoughts on your theory there of dynasty and best ball?
I think it's just, we've seen it happen. Let's say Rashad Bateman. I'll just use him as an example, right? Let's say he goes out and has what we consider a good year. He's a mid wide receiver 2 as far as fantasy points per game wise. Where's he going to go in dynasty next year? He's going to be a top 10 guy. And that's the thing. If you end up looking at your best ball shares and you're like, wow, I have somehow 30% of Bateman on my team. I didn't even know I liked him that much. And then you're like, well, if I end up really do liking him that much in best ball, I'll go get that same amount of shares. It always depends on your teams, right? You talked about this before the show, Dan. Like, we have John, who has almost 100 teams. I have 50. I think you're sitting around 20 right now. So like, there's this varying range of, we could talk about 30%, but maybe you only have 2 or 3 teams. And you only have 4 or 5 best ball teams, but maybe on 3 of those, you have someone like Bateman. Maybe that means, you know what? I'm going to be a little bit overweight on my 2 out of my 3 dynasty teams. I'm going to go get Bateman, because if he hits, then all of a sudden 66% of my teams are going to be better off than they were before. And really, how low can he go? He's not going to drop off very far, because we already know he's in line for that many targets. And we saw how he didn't drop even when he was injured last year. So just kind of looking at someone like that, I think it works a lot better with younger players than it does with older ones. Like, I have a lot of Jarvis Landry in best ball. I don't want Jarvis Landry at all in my dynasty teams. So it doesn't work with veterans, but it could help you isolate some rookies that you really like, or just some younger players that you should maybe go and try to trade for in your dynasty teams.
I love that you brought it up, and I'm actually throwing out the guys I put in my show notes, and I didn't share these names with you, Mitch, but as I look at my best ball shares, it's none of the guys I thought I was going to talk about, but young guys. Okay, like, so veterans, Devontae Parker, Marvin Jones, maybe not so much, and definitely, not Marvin Jones, but not as much in dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
But young guys, I just realized I have guys that I would really be attracted to that I'm realizing I'm drafting a lot in best ball. Devontae Smith, 31% shares. Jahan Dotson, 31% shares. Wan'Dale Robinson, 27% shares. George Pickens, 27% shares. So there are some young, talented guys that I'm gobbling up that maybe I should be focusing more on them than those bigger names in, at wide receiver in dynasty. Even Paris Campbell, if he could ever possibly stay healthy, 27% shares. Brandon Ayuk, who's looking really good.
Mm-hmm.
I have 22% shares of him in best ball. So
Dotson's a really good one, because, we bring up Bateman. Everyone kind of knows I like Bateman. Everyone else talks about Bateman. Dotson doesn't get a lot of hype. So if you were to go out and get a lot of him on your dynasty teams and he ends up hitting, I think you're just so much better off than you are than if you go for some of the higher named guys that we all kind of value already.
Yeah, no one wants to trade their Jameson Williams and those big receivers that went early, but they may trade you Jahan Dotson, or if you're in a startup, you're going to have a better chance of getting him, and that may be the best move ever. It was like Jalen Waddle. At one point, I'm like, wait a second, I need to be looking more at Waddle. I got a ton of shares, and then he popped off last year. So finding the Jalen Waddle, is it Dotson? Or I see John Bauer's shares, as he shared with us, on his so-claimed vacation / suspension, whatever you want to deem it as listeners. He has 26% of Jalen Tolbert, 22% of David Bell, 21% of Chris Olave. They are receivers that aren't necessarily, they weren't the top ones by any means going in our dynasty drafts. But boy, he's got a high percentage of share, and they could really pop up. And Tolbert's starting to continue to rise as Dallas receivers are dropping like flies here. And he also has 22% of Antonio Gibson in the spirit of our running back conversation. He's been hopping high on that train. So, Mitch, I think we covered a lot tonight.
All right.
Final thoughts.
So I must say, before, I just saw some buttons and I just started clicking. John's in charge of this. It's his fault for allowing us to push the buttons in the first place, so we'll say. But Dan, do you want me to go with the final thought first?
Kick us off there.
I'm just going to say, we mentioned it last show. I'm just going to mention again that we're going to be in Canton Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I'll be there Monday morning. I don't know when you're headed out, Dan. But just reach out to us, Twitter, Discord, anything. We have a whole bunch of people from the Discord that are heading out with us as well. So it's going to be super cool. But yeah, we'll meet up. I know there's a whole bunch of different groups meeting up at different places, but just reach out. We'll hang out, grab a beer, do that sort of thing.
Absolutely can't wait. We will be in Canton, Ohio next weekend. I'll be arriving early Friday to get there for the mixer at the hotel as everybody's checking in. Again, I don't remember names all the time, or our Twitter logos are sometimes unfamiliar. Please introduce yourself, and then the light bulb will go off. And I can't wait to have a daddy soda with you at some point during the trip and meet a lot of our listeners. It's going to be a blast. And my last final thought will be preseason DFS kicks off tomorrow. It is Jacksonville and the Raiders. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
So we get our first one. I will be kicking off preseason DFS. John's not here, so I get to put a DFS plug in there. We are looking for how much time they are playing and how much volume we think they are getting versus we don't care if they're a big name or not in preseason. It's how much playing time, even if the starters, I read somewhere the Bears are playing starters in their first preseason game.
Whatever.
I don't care. They'll be in there for one series. Don't play them, So if you got any questions on that, send a message in our Discord or on Twitter and we'll get back to you. That's all I got, Mitch. Tonight was a blast. JB, will we welcome him back on our next show here? His suspension will be lifted. And until then, we'll see you on the next episode of Dynasty Theory.